The sun basked in the clear blue sky when two lambs, Ovvi and Dolly, grazed peacefully on the green field of their cozy farm. They were living symbols of tranquility, enjoying life and their fluffy wool. "Oh, how I love these soft, warm days, Ovvi," said Dolly, whose eyes sparkled with pleasure. "Yes, Dolly, everything here is so beautiful. But haven't you ever dreamed of seeing something new?" Ovvi replied, looking at the shimmering river beyond the farm. With this thought, they decided to start their first grand adventure. "Let's go swim in the river, Dolly. It'll be our little secret," Ovvi proposed with a wide smile. So, they crept up to the farm gate and, using their little legs, pushed the gate until it opened. A slight fresh breeze blowing from the river greeted them, and they joyfully ran to the river, leaving their serene farm behind. They arrived at the river and noticed how the warm sun's rays reflected off its surface, creating shimmering glimmers. They dove into the cool water, and their laughter echoed off the surrounding trees. However, when they emerged from the water, basking in the warm rays of the sun, they noticed a shadow on the horizon. The gray shadow slowly transformed into a gray wolf who was relentlessly approaching. "Oh no, it's a wolf! What do we do, Ovvi?" Dolly whispered, her eyes filling with horror. Ovvi looked at his brother, his heart frozen with fear. "We need to run, Dolly. Run fast and far," Ovvi said. With a threatening, grim look, the wolf gave chase to the lambs. The two brothers, Ovvi and Dolly, forgetting about their plan to swim in the river, dashed forward, right into the heart of the forest. Their hearts pounded like drums at a festival, and their eyes reflected immense panic. "Why didn't we just stay on the farm?" Ovvi thought in despair. But at the same time, he knew this was not the time for regrets. Suddenly, as if by a wave of a magic wand, an incredibly fast hare jumped out of the bushes. "Over here, guys!" he shouted, hopping down the trail. The wolf, distracted by a new possible treat, sharply turned and ran after the hare. Meanwhile, the lambs, thanks to quick thinking, jumped into thick bushes and temporarily hid from the hungry gaze of the wolf. They sat there, holding their breath until the rustling of the chase subsided. And when the sounds of pursuit finally vanished, the lambs cautiously peeked out from their hiding place. There was no sign of the wolf. The hare, in turn, returned, grinning from ear to ear. "Well, shall we get out of here?" he suggested, and they all moved on together. They walked, pushing through the thick undergrowth, until they reached a clearing where the hare pointed to a huge pile of carrots. "You can help me with this?" he said, pointing to the carrot. Ovvi and Dolly agreed, so they spent the rest of the day laughing and unloading, Kara enjoying the warmth of the sun and the sweet scent of the forest. But at the same time, deep in the forest, the wolf watched them, and his eyes sparkled with a sinister light. "I'll be back," he hissed, retreating into the darkness, preparing for new cunning plans. The next day, deep in the shaded corners of the forest, Ovvi and Dolly continued their journey, creeping along a carpet of fluffy moss, quiet as a summer breeze. "Remember, Ov, we need to be like ghosts," Dolly whispered softly. Her blue eyes were worried. Suddenly, an unexpected noise came from somewhere deep in the forest. The lambs froze, their heartbeat loud as drums. And then, from behind a lush bush, an old owl flew out, twinkling in the darkness. "Such little lambs, and you've come to such a deep forest. she said. Her voice sounded like the rustle of falling leaves. Ovvi, sighing with relief, replied, "We're lost, Madam Owl. Please help us." But the owl didn't want to help them, and she disappeared into the darkness, leaving the lambs alone. As they continued their journey, the tree branches began to intertwine tightly above them, forming a canopy similar to a dark green cave. Suddenly, the sounds of the forest became muted, and an unnatural silence fell. Ovvi and Dolly stopped, feeling the unsettling atmosphere. "Something's not right here, Ovvi," Dolly whispered. Her eyes grew even larger, full of anxiety. Ovvi nodded, confirming her fears. "We need to be very careful," he replied, his voice trembling with fear and determination. Moving forward, they found a small pond in which the stars were reflected. The water was so clear that they could see their reflections. Where the water met the land, mushrooms grew, oddly glowing in the darkness. Suddenly, a little hedgehog came out from behind a tree. He was so tiny that Ovvi and Dolly could barely hold back their admiring sighs. "Who are you?" the hedgehog hissed, his little eyes full of curiosity and alertness. "We're lambs, Ovvi and Dolly," Ovvi replied, trying to sound as friendly as possible. "We're lost and looking for our way home." "I can help," said the hedgehog. His voice was gentle and warm. The lambs began to follow the hedgehog. Dry leaves rustled underfoot. The moon lit their path, creating light and dark stripes on the ground. The wind caressed their wool, bringing the smells of the forest and fresh earth. But as they moved further, the atmosphere around became more and more worrying. In the distance, the loud roar of the wolf echoed, making them shudder. "Don't be afraid, it's just the old wolf," the hedgehog reassured them. But his voice sounded unconvincing. Suddenly, the shadow of the wolf appeared in the moonlight, right in front of them. Ovvi and Dolly froze in fear. The wolf was huge. His eyes shone in the darkness, and he looked at them with undisguised interest. Ovvi and Dolly froze in fear, looking at the wolf, who was watching them with fiery eyes. They clung to each other, trembling with fear. The wolf was approaching, his menacing gaze becoming more and more dangerous. "We should have listened to Dad," Dolly whispered, and tears rolled down her cheeks. Ovvi nodded, feeling deep regret and guilt. They wanted freedom too much, and didn't think about the consequences. Suddenly, like thunder out of a clear sky, a loud and powerful roar sounded. They saw a huge figure approaching from the darkness. It was their father Ram. His horns gleamed in the light, and his eyes were filled with fury and determination. "Stay away from my children, wolf!" the father ram roared loudly, heading straight for the wolf. The wolf recoiled, the fury in his eyes quickly replaced by fear. With difficulty, he turned around and ran deep into the forest. Avoiding a confrontation with the father ram hugged his children, and they felt their fear leaving them. They promised their father that they would no longer leave the farm without his permission. They understood that freedom is important, but safety and obedience are even more important. Returning home, they saw that everything on the farm was just as they left it, but everything seemed much more appealing and precious. They felt their hearts filled with happiness from returning home, and they thanked their father for his heroic rescue. "Never forget," said the father, hugging them. "Freedom wonderful, but it requires careful handling." and always listen to your parents' advice.